I'm Leo, 25 male, and my father, who abandoned me 8 years ago, is now demanding half of the restaurant chain I built from nothing. He didn't just ask. He walked into my flagship restaurant, a place born from my sweat and fear, and told me that he was entitled to it. He looked me in the eye, the same eyes that had looked away when he left me to care for my sick uncle, and threatened to sue me into oblivion if I refused. The bell above the door of the hearth chimed, a pleasant, familiar sound that usually made me smile. It was a sound that meant another happy customer, another family coming in for a warm meal. But on that Tuesday afternoon, it announced the arrival of two ghosts from a past I had worked tirelessly to bury. I was standing near the pass, discussing the evening's specials with my head chef when I saw them. My father, Richard, looking older and softer around the middle than I remembered, and a woman I recognized from old, bitter memories as Cynthia, his wife. They stood just inside the doorway, looking around with an air of detached appraisal, as if they were critics preparing to tear my life's work apart. The hearth was my pride and joy, the first brick-and-mortar location I opened after years of running a food cart. It was designed to feel like a welcoming embrace, warm woods, soft lighting, the scent of baking bread and roasting garlic hanging in the air. It was everything I never had in my own home after my mother passed away and my father checked out. To see him standing there, in the heart of my sanctuary, felt like a violation. My chef Maria noticed the change in my expression. "Everything okay, Leo?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I forced a tight smile. "Just some unexpected guests, I'll be right back." I wiped my hands on my apron, a nervous habit, and walked towards them. Every step was heavy, each one dredging up a decade of pain. Richard's eyes finally landed on me, and a slow, calculating smile spread across his face. It wasn't the smile of a proud father seeing his son's success. It was the smile of a prospector who had just struck gold. "Leo," he said, his voice smooth and practiced. "Look at this place. You've done well for yourself, very well." Cynthia's gaze swept over me, her expression a mixture of surprise and condescension. She was dressed impeccably in a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than my first food cart. "We were in the area and thought we'd pop in," she said, her voice as sharp and sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. "Richard has been so keen to see what you've been up to." "8 years is a long time to be keen," I replied, my voice flatter than I intended. "What do you want, Richard?" He feigned a wounded look. "Is that any way to greet your old man? Can't a father just want to see his son?" He gestured around the bustling dining room. "I'll admit I'm impressed, truly, this is quite the operation." The last time I had seen that look on his face, that mixture of false charm and self-interest, was the day he left. I was 17, a month shy of graduating high school. He had sat me down at the same kitchen table where my mother used to help me with my homework. His bags were already packed and waiting by the door. "I need to start a new life, Leo," he had said, refusing to meet my eyes. He was focused on straightening a placemat that was already perfectly straight. "Cynthia and I, we're going to build a future together. It's time for me to be happy." "What about us?" I had asked, my voice barely a whisper. Us meant me and my Uncle Sam, my dad's older brother, who had moved in with us after his diabetes took a turn for the worse. Sam, who was more of a father to me than Richard had ever been, especially after my mom was gone. "Sam's a grown man," Richard said dismissively. "And you're almost 18, you're practically an adult. You can handle things here, I'll send money when I can." He never did, not a single dollar. He didn't just leave me, he left me with the crushing responsibility of caring for a man with a serious chronic illness. He left me in a house with a mortgage payment, with utility bills, and with an empty refrigerator. He left me with Uncle Sam's complex schedule of medications, blood sugar tests, and specialized dietary needs that I knew nothing about. I remembered the cold dread that washed over me as I watched his car pull out of the driveway. I was utterly, terrifyingly alone. I walked back inside to find Uncle Sam sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a profound sadness, not for himself but for me. "It's going to be okay, kiddo," he had said, his voice raspy. "We'll figure it out, we have each other." And we did. The first few months were a blur of fear and frantic learning. I took a job washing dishes at a local diner, working until 2 a.m., then getting up at 6 a.m. to make sure Sam had his breakfast and his morning insulin shot. IL. Earned to count carbs, to recognize the signs of high and low blood sugar, and to argue with insurance companies on the phone. My plans for community college, for a normal life, evaporated like steam from a hot skillet. My childhood ended the moment Richard's taillights disappeared around the corner. Now, standing in the middle of the restaurant that was built on that struggle, Richard had the audacity to act as if he were just an old friend dropping by. "Why don't you give us the tour?" he suggested, already walking towards the main dining area as if he owned the place. I want to see everything. I followed, my jaw tight. I walked them through the dining room, explained the open kitchen concept, and showed them the private event space. With every step, his comments became more and more possessive. Not "you have a great eye for design, but this is a great layout." Not "you've hired a good team, but this staff seems very efficient." It was as if he were assessing an asset, not celebrating his son's achievement. He paused by the wine cellar, peering through the glass door. "A good selection," he noted, nodding his head. "Smart, high-profit margins on alcohol." As a financial advisor, he couldn't help but see the world in terms of profit and loss. He saw my life's work not as a story of resilience, but as a balance sheet. "We do okay," I said, my patience wearing thin. He finally turned to face me, his back to the restaurant, creating a small bubble of false intimacy. "Leo, I'm proud of you," he said, and for a fleeting, foolish second my heart lurched. A part of me, the 17-year-old kid still trapped inside, wanted to believe him, but then came the rest. "I knew you had it in you, that ambition, that drive. You get that from me, and that's why Cynthia and I are here. It's time for me to be a part of this, to help you take it to the next level." I stared at him, a cold understanding dawning. This wasn't a social call. This wasn't a reconciliation. This was a business meeting I hadn't agreed to. He hadn't come to see his son, he had come to collect. "A part of this," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "What are you talking about?" Richard's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those remained fixed on me, sharp and predatory. "Let's sit down," he said, gesturing to an empty table in a quiet corner. He didn't wait for my agreement, simply pulling out a chair for Cynthia before seating himself. He looked every bit the powerful executive about to close a deal. I remained standing, my arms crossed over my chest. The apron I was still wearing suddenly felt like armor. "I'm not sitting down," I said. "Say what you came to say, and then you can leave." Cynthia let out a little scoff, a sound of pure, unadulterated offense. "Well, that's certainly no way to treat family," she said, adjusting the cuff of her silk blouse. "Your father is trying to help you." "Help me?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The last time you helped me was by packing your bags and leaving me to figure out how to pay the mortgage, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little skeptical." Richard held up a hand, silencing Cynthia. His charming facade was beginning to crack, revealing the cold arrogance beneath. "Look, Leo, let's not get into all that. The past is the past. What's important is the future. I've been doing some research. You have 3 of these places now and a 4th in development. You're franchising the food cart concept. Your revenue must be significant." "My finances are none of your business," I shot back. "That's where you're wrong," he said, leaning forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is my business. It's our family's business. I gave you your start in life. I gave you the seed from which all this grew. Genetically speaking, of course, your ambition, your drive, that's from me." I just stared at him, dumbfounded by the sheer audacity. He was trying to claim a biological commission on my success. "Richard and I have fallen on some difficult times," Cynthia chimed in, her voice dripping with practiced victimhood. "The market has been unpredictable. A man of your father's talent shouldn't have to worry about such things. We deserve a certain quality of life." And there it was, the truth, ugly and raw. They were out of money. The lavish lifestyle they had built on the wreckage of our family had finally caught up to them. They hadn't come here to reconnect. They had come here because their well had run dry and they saw me as a new one to tap. Richard cleared his throat, sensing he was losing ground. He decided to get straight to the point. "So here's the proposal. It's more than fair. We'll take a 50% stake in the parent company. I'll take a position on the board as chairman naturally. I can guide the financial strategy, help you expand nationally. Cynthia can consult on branding and aesthetics. It'll be a true family enterprise. Rise just like it should have been all along." The air left my lungs, 50%. He said it so casually, as if he were asking for a slice of bread, half of everything I had bled for. Half of the sleepless nights, the constant worry, the physical toll of working 16-hour days. Half of the business I built to keep a roof over my sick uncle's head. He wanted to walk in after 8 years of silence and take half of my life. I looked from his expectant face to Cynthia's smug grin. She was already mentally spending the money, redecorating their life with my hard work. The rage that had been simmering inside me for years finally boiled over. It was so potent, so pure, that it made me feel perfectly calm. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the space between us with the force of a slammed door. Richard blinked as if he hadn't heard me correctly. "What?" "No," I repeated, louder this time, my voice echoing slightly in the dining room. A few patrons turned to look. The answer is no, you will not get 50%, you will not get 1%, you will not get a seat on the board, and you will not get a single dime. You are not entitled to anything. Cynthia gasped, clutching her chest in mock horror. How can you be so ungrateful? Richard's face flushed a deep, angry red. The mask was completely gone now. This was the man I remembered from my childhood, the man whose temper would flare at the slightest provocation. Ungrateful? I am your father, I gave you everything. You gave me nothing, my voice rose, and I didn't care who heard. You left me at 17 with a sick man to care for and a stack of bills I had no way to pay. Where were you when I was working 2 jobs and still couldn't afford Uncle Sam's insulin? Where were you when I was sleeping on flour sacks in the back of my food cart because I couldn't afford gas to drive home? You weren't here, you have no claim here. He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. I will not be spoken to like this. I gave you the idea for this business. This new lie was so outrageous I could only laugh. The idea? My grandmother gave me her recipes, my uncle gave me his encouragement, my fear gave me the motivation. The only thing you ever gave me was a reason to never, ever depend on anyone but myself. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He was breathing heavily, his eyes wild with fury. He was losing and he knew it. So he reached for his final weapon, a threat. You think you can just say no? He hissed, leaning across the table. I have proof. I have documents showing I provided the seed money for your first cart, a $5,000 investment. We had a verbal agreement that I'd be a silent partner. The lie was breathtaking in its simplicity and its evil. There was no money, there was no agreement. He was inventing a past to steal my future. You're lying, I said, my voice shaking with rage. And you know you're lying. Prove it, he snarled. It'll be my word against yours in court. Who do you think a judge will believe? The successful, established financial advisor or the delinquent kid who got lucky? I will drag your name and the name of this company through the mud. By the time I'm done with you, you'll be begging me to take the 50%. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. With that, he turned on his heel. Cynthia, looking pale and shaken now that the confrontation had turned so ugly, scurried after him. The bell above the door chimed their exit, the sound now mocking and cruel. I stood there frozen in the middle of my beautiful restaurant. The low hum of conversation had ceased. Every eye in the room was on me, a mixture of pity and curiosity on their faces. I felt exposed, humiliated, and utterly alone, just like I had all those years ago. The ghosts hadn't just visited, they had come back to haunt me. The drive home was a blur. The familiar streets of the city passed by my car windows, but I saw none of them. My mind was a chaotic replay of the scene at the restaurant, Richard's furious, distorted face and Cynthia's venomous words echoing in my ears. The threat of a lawsuit built on a foundation of pure fiction felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. He wouldn't just try to take my money. He would try to rewrite my story, painting me as a user and a thief, and himself as the benevolent, wronged father. By the time I pulled into the driveway of the small, modest house I shared with Uncle Sam, my hands were trembling. This house was the one I grew up in, the one my father had abandoned. I'd paid off the mortgage 2 years ago, the final payment feeling like the severing of the last financial tie to Richard. It was a simple place, but it was ours. It was a real home, filled with warmth and safety, everything the hearth was designed to emulate. I walked in and was greeted by the comforting scent of old books and chamomile tea. Uncle Sa. M was in his favorite armchair in the living room, a thick history book resting on his lap and a steaming mug on the table beside him. He looked up as I entered, and his gentle smile immediately faltered when he saw my face. Leo, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. I sank onto the sofa opposite him, the fight draining out of me, leaving a hollow exhaustion in its place. Worse, I said, my voice hoarse. I saw my father. I told him everything. I recounted the whole surreal, nightmarish encounter from the moment they walked in, to the insane demand for half of my company, to the final, disgusting threat of a lawsuit based on a lie. As I spoke, Sam listened patiently, his expression shifting from sadness to a quiet, simmering anger on my behalf. He knew Richard's capacity for selfishness better than anyone. He was his brother, after all. When I finished, he just shook his head slowly, a look of profound disappointment in his eyes. I'm sorry, Leo, he said softly. I'm so sorry he's putting you through this. After everything you've done, everything you've built. He said he gave me the seed money, I said, the absurdity of it still ringing in my ears. $5,000, can you believe that? Sam let out a sad chuckle. The only thing my brother ever invested in was himself. Don't you worry about his lies, we know the truth. We certainly did. The real seed money for my business wasn't $5,000 from a man who had vanished. It was $67 scraped together from the change jar in the kitchen and the tips from my dishwashing job. That and a book. My grandmother's old, worn-out recipe book, its pages stained with vanilla and grease, the spine held together with tape. The memory of those early days came rushing back sharp and vivid. After Richard left, our financial situation became desperate almost immediately. The small disability check Sam received barely covered the cost of his insulin and testing supplies. My dishwashing job paid for groceries but never seemed to stretch far enough. I remember the constant, gnawing fear in the pit of my stomach, a fear of the lights being turned off, of the pharmacy refusing to fill a prescription, of losing the house. The idea for the food cart was born out of that desperation. I was sitting at the kitchen table one night, staring at a pile of final notice bills, feeling the walls close in. My gaze fell on my grandmother's recipe book, sitting on the counter where she'd always left it. I opened it, and the first page I saw was for her slow-cooked pulled pork, a dish so tender and flavorful it was legendary at family gatherings. A crazy idea sparked in my mind. What if I could sell this? People loved her food, maybe they would pay for it. The next day I used my $67 to buy a cheap cut of pork, some buns, and the ingredients for her secret barbecue sauce. I cooked it all in our tiny kitchen, the aroma filling the house and for a moment chasing away the scent of worry. I borrowed a rusty old card table and a cooler from a neighbor and set up shop on a busy street corner downtown. That first day I sold out in 2 hours. I made almost $200. It felt like a million. It was the first time since Richard left that I felt a glimmer of hope, a sense of control over my own destiny. That $200 bought us groceries for a week and went towards the electric bill. Every penny was a victory. From there I became obsessed. I saved every dollar I could, eventually buying a beat-up second-hand food cart for a few $100s. I painted it myself a bright, cheerful red. I called it Grandma's Kitchen. I worked tirelessly, rain or shine, perfecting the small menu of my grandmother's classics: the pulled pork, the creamy macaroni and cheese, the rich, hearty beef stew. It was simple, honest food made with care. But it wasn't easy. There were days I sold almost nothing. There were turf wars with other food vendors. There was the constant, back-breaking labor of prep, service, and cleanup, all done in a cramped metal box. And then there was the incident that almost broke me. Uncle Sam's health was a constant worry. One evening I came home late from a long day at the cart, exhausted and smelling of barbecue smoke. I found him on the floor, unconscious. His blood sugar had crashed. I'd never felt terror like that before. My hands shook so badly I could barely dial 911. The ambulance ride, the frantic work of the paramedics, the sterile, indifferent waiting room of the hospital, it was all a nightmare. He recovered, thank God, but the hospital bill was astronomical. Thousands of dollars we didn't have. Staring at that bill, I felt a new kind of resolve harden within me. This couldn't be my life anymore, living on the edge of disaster, one medical emergency away from ruin. It wasn't enough to just survive. I had to build something real, something secure, to protect the only family I had left.
Well,
That was the real seed money. It wasn't cash. It was fear and love and desperation. It was the memory of my grandmother's cooking and the sight of my uncle, pale and still, on the linoleum floor. Richard had no part in it. He wasn't there. "He doesn't get to take that from me, Sam," I said, my voice low but firm, the memory giving me strength. "He doesn't get to lie and steal the truth of what we went through. I don't care what it costs. I'm not giving in." Sam reached across and put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was surprisingly strong. "I know you won't, Leo," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "The man you are today, you built yourself, and no one can ever take that away from you. We'll face him together." In that moment, sitting in our quiet living room, the weight of the past didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a foundation. And it was a foundation that Richard's lies could never hope to shake. A few days later, the threat materialized. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived by courier. It was from a law firm with a fancy, embossed letterhead, the kind that was designed to intimidate before you even read the contents. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside, a formal letter from Richard's lawyer laid out his fraudulent claims in cold, legalistic language. It spoke of a verbal partnership agreement and a capital investment of $5,000 made in good faith. It accused me of unjust enrichment and breach of familial trust. Every word was a calculated lie, polished and weaponized. The letter concluded with a demand for immediate settlement negotiations to avoid a lengthy and public lawsuit. My first reaction wasn't fear, but a white-hot anger. He was actually doing it. He was trying to use the legal system to validate his delusion. But as the day wore on, the anger gave way to a creeping anxiety. A lawsuit, even a frivolous one, could be devastating. The legal fees alone would be enormous, and the damage to my company's reputation could be irreparable. Richard knew that. This wasn't about winning in court. It was about bleeding me dry and dragging my name through the mud until I gave in. His next move was even more insidious. He began his pressure campaign. The first call came from my Aunt Carol, my father's sister. I hadn't spoken to her in years, not since she'd sent a sympathy card after my mom died and then vanished along with the rest of the family. "Leo, darling," she began, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern. "I just had the most distressing call from your father." I stayed silent, waiting. "He told me everything," she continued. "How you've shut him out, how you've taken the business that he helped you start and are refusing to give him his fair share. I have to say I'm shocked, after all he did for you." "All he did for me," I interrupted, my voice dangerously quiet. "Aunt Carol, where have you been for the last 8 years?" She sputtered, caught off guard. "Well, you know how life gets, we've been busy, but that's not the point. The point is that he's your father. Blood is thicker than water, Leo. You can't just throw him away. He's willing to forgive you if you just do the right thing." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He had twisted the story so completely, painting himself as the victim, the benevolent patriarch wronged by his ungrateful son, and she had bought it hook, line, and sinker. I tried to explain. I told her about the abandonment, about caring for Sam, about the fact that Richard hadn't given me a single penny. Her response was chilling. "Oh, Leo, there are two sides to every story. You were a teenager. Teenagers can be very difficult. I'm sure your father had his reasons." She didn't want the truth. She wanted the simple, convenient story that didn't require her to feel any guilt for her own years of neglect. I ended the call, my heart heavy. Over the next few days, more calls came. Uncles, cousins, old family friends, some were cautious, asking for my side of the story. Others were openly accusatory, parroting Richard's lies. He was systematically poisoning the well, trying to isolate me from anyone who might support me. He wanted me to feel alone, to feel like the whole world was against me. And for a while, it worked. The weight of their judgment was suffocating. I started to doubt myself, not the facts, but my ability to withstand the onslaught. The joy I took in my work began to fade, replaced by a constant dread. Every time the phone rang, my stomach clenched. It was Uncle Sam who pulled me back from the edge. He found me one night, sitting in the dark, the lawyer's letter on the table in front of me. "Don't let him get in your head, Leo," he said, switching on a lamp. The soft light filled the room, pushing back the shadows. "This is what he does. He manipulates, he twists things. He makes you feel like you're the crazy one. Don't let his darkness put out your light." He was right. I couldn't fight this alone. And I couldn't fight it by hiding. The next morning, I made a call. I found a lawyer, a woman named Diana Albright who specialized in business litigation. Her online profile said she was tough, sharp, and had a reputation for fighting for the underdog. When I met her in her downtown office, she was all of that and more. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of no-nonsense competence. I sat across from her polished mahogany desk and laid out the entire story, starting from the day Richard left. I didn't hold anything back. I told her about the dishwashing job, the $67, the food cart, Sam's medical emergency, and the crushing hospital bill. I showed her my early business records, meticulously kept in old notebooks, every penny earned, every dollar spent. I had proof of every step of my journey. She listened intently, her expression unreadable. She would occasionally jot down a note or ask a clarifying question, but mostly she just let me talk. When I finally finished, placing Richard's lawyer's letter on her desk, she leaned back in her chair and looked at me for a long moment. "He's a fool," she said simply. Her voice was calm but carried an unmistakable edge of steel. "And a bully. Bullies like this count on you being too scared and too exhausted to fight back. His entire case is built on a lie, and lies are fragile things, Mr. Romano." "Call me Leo," I said. A small smile touched her lips. "Leo, your father's claim is what we in the legal world call spurious. It lacks any factual basis. However, that doesn't mean he can't cause you a great deal of trouble. A public lawsuit, even one we will win, can be a messy, expensive, and emotionally draining process. That's his leverage." "So what do we do?" I asked, feeling a sliver of hope for the first time in weeks. "Don't flinch," she said, her eyes glinting. "We don't offer a settlement, we don't negotiate. We send a response so firm and so full of facts that his own lawyer will advise him to walk away. We will document his campaign of slander against you among the family. We will gather sworn affidavits. We will make it very clear that if he proceeds with this lawsuit, we will not only defend it, but we will countersue for defamation and malicious prosecution. We will turn his weapon back on him." What? Walking out of her office, I felt like I could breathe again. The anxiety hadn't vanished, but it was no longer all-consuming. It was now joined by a sense of purpose. Richard had started a war of lies, but I was now armed with the truth. Ms. Albright had given me more than just legal counsel. She had given me a strategy, and more importantly, she believed me. The chapter of hiding was over. The chapter of fighting back was about to begin. Ms. Albright was true to her word. Her response to Richard's lawyer was a masterpiece of legal firepower. It systematically dismantled every one of his claims, citing my own meticulously kept records as evidence. It included a detailed timeline of my business's growth, cross-referenced with my tax returns and bank statements, proving that the company was built solely on its own revenue, not on any mythical investment. The letter concluded with a stern warning. Any further contact with me or my family members for the purpose of slander or any attempt to file a frivolous lawsuit would be met with swift and aggressive legal action. It was, in essence, a declaration that the games were over. For about a week there was silence. The calls from relatives stopped. The pressure seemed to recede. I allowed myself to hope that Richard, faced with the prospect of a real fight he couldn't possibly win, had finally backed down. But I had underestimated his desperation, and I had certainly underestimated Cynthia's influence. When the legal threat failed, they pivoted to a more personal form of attack. Cynthia began posting on social media. Her posts were never direct, always couched in vague, passive-aggressive terms. "It's so sad when children forget where they came from," one post read, accompanied by a stock photo of a lonely, windswept tree. Another said, "True wealth isn't money, it's family. Some people have all the money in the world but are completely bankrupt in their souls." It was pathetic and transparent, but it was designed to chip away at me, to paint me as a cold-hearted monster to her circle of friends. I ignored it. I blocked her profile and focused on my work. The restaurants were thriving, and we were about to break ground on the fourth location. I poured my energy into my business and into caring for Sam, trying to rebuild the sense of peace that Richard's return had shattered. Then my father crossed a line from which there was no return. I had a long meeting with my construction foreman one afternoon and got home later than usual. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw Richard's car parked at the curb. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. He had no R. To be here, this was Sam's home, my home. It was a sanctuary he had forfeited all rights to. I burst through the front door to find him in the living room with Uncle Sam. He wasn't yelling, he was doing something far worse. He was sitting in my mother's old armchair, leaning forward with a look of intense, phony sincerity on his face, speaking to Sam in a low, placating voice. Sam was in his own chair, looking pale and deeply distressed. A half-empty glass of water trembled in his hand. "And that's all I'm asking for, Sam," Richard was saying. "Just talk to him, make him see reason. He's young, he's emotional, he doesn't understand the world of business. This is for his own good. With my guidance, his little restaurants could become a national empire." "Get out," I said. My voice was eerily calm, but it cut through the air like a shard of ice. Both men turned to look at me. Richard's face registered a flash of annoyance at being interrupted before rearranging itself into a welcoming smile. "Leo, there you are. Your uncle and I were just having a chat, trying to sort all this nonsense out man to man." "I said get out of my house," I repeated, walking further into the room to stand between him and my uncle. Sam looked up at me, relief washing over his face. "Leo, he just showed up. I told him he should leave." "It's okay, Uncle Sam," I said, my eyes locked on Richard. "I'll handle this." Richard stood up, bristling with indignation. "This is my brother's house too. I have a right to be here. I'm trying to help this family." "You don't have a family," I shot back, my voice rising. "You have people you abandoned and people you use. You walked out on this man when he was sick and needed you. You left him in the care of a child. You didn't call, you didn't write, you didn't send a dime for his medicine. You don't get to come back here 8 years later and pretend you have any rights. You don't get to harass him in his own home because you're failing in your own life." The accusation hit its mark, his face contorted with rage. "You insolent brat, I am trying to offer you an opportunity. I'm trying to fix things." "Fix things?" Sam spoke up, his voice stronger now, fueled by my presence. "You want to fix things, Richard? Where were you when Leo had to drop his college plans to wash dishes? Where were you when I ended up in the hospital because we were trying to stretch my insulin doses? You weren't fixing things then. You were living your new life with your new wife and you never once looked back. You don't get to come here now and talk about family." Richard stared at his brother, speechless for a moment. To be confronted by the gentle, long-suffering Sam was something he clearly had not prepared for. He had expected to find a weak, sickly man he could easily manipulate, not a man with a spine of steel forged in the fire of his neglect. He turned his anger back to me. "This is your fault," he spat. "You've poisoned him against me." "No," I said, taking a final step towards him, forcing him to take a step back towards the door. "You did this. This is the result of your own choices. You are not welcome here. You have caused enough pain. Now for the last time, get out. He stared at me, his chest heaving. For a second I thought he might get violent, but he saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't the look of the scared 17-year-old boy he had left behind. It was the look of a man protecting his home, his family, and his life's work. It was a look of absolute finality. He finally broke, turning and storming out the door, slamming it so hard the windows rattled. I stood there, breathing heavily, listening to the sound of his car speeding away. The silence that followed was immense. I turned to Sam, who looked shaken but resolute. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice softening. He nodded, taking a slow, deep breath. "He tried to offer me money," Sam admitted, his voice full of disgust. "He said if I could convince you, he'd make sure I was taken care of for life. As if your love isn't the only thing that's been taking care of me all these years." That was it, that was the final straw. Harassing me was one thing, slandering me to my family was another. But trying to bribe and manipulate the gentle, kind man who had been my rock, my entire world, after abandoning him to his fate, that was unforgivable. It was a sin so profound it could never be washed away. The anger and hurt inside me coalesced into something cold and hard as diamond. This couldn't be a passive fight anymore, waiting for his next move. I had to end this. I pulled out my phone, my hands perfectly steady now, and dialed his number. He answered on the first ring, no doubt expecting an apology or a capitulation. "What?" he barked. "We need to meet," I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. "Tomorrow, just you and me, no lawyers, no Cynthia, this ends now." We agreed to meet at a small, quiet park halfway between my house and the city. It was neutral ground, a place with no memories and no attachments. I chose a bench overlooking a duck pond, the picture of tranquility. It was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. When Richard arrived, he had a look of cautious optimism on his face. He clearly thought his campaign of harassment had worked, that I had finally been worn down and was ready to negotiate. He thought he was coming to a surrender. He was wrong. He sat down on the other end of the bench, leaving a careful distance between us. "Leo," he began, adopting a tone of magnanimous forgiveness. "I'm glad you called. I knew you'd come to your senses. This whole situation has just been unnecessarily dramatic." "There's nothing to negotiate, Richard," I said, not looking at him, my gaze fixed on the ripples in the pond. "I didn't ask you here to make a deal. I asked you here to say what I need to say, and then we are done. Forever." His smile faltered. "Now let's not be hasty." I turned to face him then, and for the first time, I looked at him not as a son looks at a father, but as one man looks at another who has wronged him beyond measure. "I want you to listen," I said, my voice steady and low. "You don't get to interrupt, you don't get to make excuses. You are going to sit there and you are going to hear the truth of what you did, not the story you tell yourself, not the fiction you peddle to your friends and family. The truth." He bristled but remained silent, taken aback by my tone. "When you left," I began, "I wasn't almost an adult. I was a kid. I was a 17-year-old boy who had just lost his mother and was about to lose his father, and you didn't just leave. You vanished into a new life and left me to clean up the mess of the old one. Do you have any idea what that was like?" I didn't wait for an answer. "I do. I know what it's like to lie awake at night, listening to the house settle, terrified that the next knock on the door will be someone from the bank. I know what it's like to water down soup to make it last an extra day. I know the smell of a hospital waiting room at 3 a.m. I know the humiliation of having to ask a pharmacist if you can pay for half a vial of insulin now and the rest next week." I could see him shifting uncomfortably, his gaze darting away. I wouldn't let him. "Look at me," I commanded, and his eyes reluctantly met mine. "You're a financial advisor, you understand numbers, so here are some for you. 8 years, that's 2,920 days, that's how long you were gone. In that time you made 0 phone calls, you sent 0 emails, you sent $0. Your total contribution to my life and to the life of your own brother was nothing. A perfect 0. I leaned forward slightly. "And now you come back, not with an apology, not with remorse, you come back with a demand. You want 50%. You want half the profits from every meal I cooked, every floor I swept, every loan I stressed over, every risk I took. You want to reap the rewards of a harvest you never planted, from a field you salted and left for dead." "It wasn't like that," he mumbled, his bravado gone, replaced by a weak defensiveness. "It was complicated." "Complicated?" I laughed, a raw, humorless sound. "No, it was simple. You made a choice. You chose yourself. You chose Cynthia. You chose a new, shiny life over the responsibilities of your old one. That was your right, but choices have consequences. And the consequence of your choice is that you lost us. You lost the right to be a father to me and a brother to Sam." I saved the most important part for last. And then after all of that, you went to his house. The man you left behind, the man whose health you never once inquired about. You went into his home and you tried to poison him against me. You tried to bribe him. You harassed a sick man, your own blood, to try and get your hands on my money. That's the man you've become, Richard. That's who you are. A tear slid down Uncle Sam's cheek when he told me what Richard had done. The image of that gentle man's pain was burned into my mind. It was the fuel for my resolve. So here is my final offer, I said, my voice dropping to almost a whisper. You will get nothing, not a single dollar of my money. You will not be the chairman of my company. You will not have any part in my life. You will walk away from me and you will walk away from Sam. You will never contact us again. Not by phone, not by email, not in person. If you or your lawyer or your wife so much as breathe in our direction again, Ms. Albright will file for a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. And she will proceed with the countersuit for every lie you've told. I stood up looking down at the man who had once been the center of my world. He looked small now, deflated and old. The blustering, arrogant man from my restaurant was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. He had nothing left to say. His lies had failed him, his threats had been called, he had lost. You're not my father, I said, the words bringing not pain but a profound and final sense of liberation. A father provides, a father protects, a father loves. You did none of those things. Sam is my family. My staff at the restaurants, they're my family. You're just the man who signed my birth certificate, and our business is concluded. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked away without looking back. I didn't storm off in anger, I just walked. With every step, I felt the weight of the last 8 years, the weight of his abandonment and his greed lifting from my shoulders. The path ahead of me was clear. I was walking towards my future, a future I had built myself, and he had no place in it. I was finally completely free. The weeks that followed the confrontation at the park were the quietest I had known in a long time. There were no more threatening letters, no more passive-aggressive social media posts, no more phone calls from misinformed relatives. It was as if Richard and Cynthia had vanished from the face of the earth. Ms. Albright confirmed that Richard's lawyer had formally withdrawn his claim, citing a misunderstanding. There was no apology, of course. I didn't expect one. The silence was apology enough. The absence of his toxic presence was transformative. It was like a chronic, low-grade fever had finally broken. The dread that had been my constant companion was gone, replaced by a sense of peace that felt both foreign and wonderful. The joy in my work returned, brighter and stronger than before. I walked into the hearth not with a sense of apprehension, but with the old pride and excitement I'd felt when it first opened. My staff, who had witnessed the ugly confrontation and supported me with their quiet loyalty, felt the change too. The tension in the restaurants dissipated and the atmosphere of a warm, welcoming family returned. We laughed more. We experimented with new dishes. I approved the final plans for the 4th location, not with the stress of a man under siege, but with the hopeful energy of a creator. One evening, I came home to find Uncle Sam in the kitchen, a place he rarely ventured into for more than a cup of tea. He had my grandmother's old recipe book open on the counter and was carefully measuring out flour. He was humming. "What's all this?" I asked, smiling. "I thought I'd try my hand at Grandma's apple crumble," he said, a dusting of flour on his nose. "It feels like a crumble kind of night, a celebration." We cooked together, side by side in the kitchen that love had paid for. We peeled apples, mixed the buttery topping, and filled the house with the scent of cinnamon and baking fruit. We didn't talk about Richard. We didn't talk about the lawsuit or the stress or the pain. We talked about memories of my grandmother. We talked about a new documentary Sam wanted to watch. We talked about what color I should paint the walls in the new restaurant. We talked about the future. As we sat at the kitchen table, eating warm crumble topped with vanilla ice cream, I looked at my uncle. His color was good, his eyes were bright. The stable, secure life I had fought so hard to build for us had allowed him to manage his health properly. He was thriving, and in his quiet strength and unwavering love, I saw the true definition of family. It wasn't about blood or last names. It was about showing up. It was about loyalty, sacrifice, and unconditional support. It was about who stays to help you clean up the mess. The next week at a company-wide meeting, I announced a new program, the Hearth Foundation. We would be partnering with local and national charities to fund diabetes research and to help low-income families afford insulin and proper medical care. A portion of the profits from every single meal sold in all of my restaurants would go directly to the foundation. My past was no longer a source of pain, it was now a source of purpose. I could use the success born from my struggle to ensure others wouldn't have to suffer the way we did. The applause from my staff was thunderous, and when I caught Maria's eye, she was beaming, giving me a thumbs up. I am no longer defined by the story of a boy who was abandoned by his father. I am the architect of my own life, a man who built a family out of love and a business out of necessity. The bitterness I once felt towards Richard has faded, replaced by a kind of distant pity. He is a man who is so impoverished in spirit that he thinks wealth can be stolen instead of earned. He will spend the rest of his life chasing shortcuts and easy money, never understanding the profound richness that comes from building something meaningful with your own two hands. My life is full. I have my health, my uncle, a business I am proud of, and a team that I consider family. I built this life not just from nothing, but from less than nothing. I built it from a place of fear and loss, and I transformed it into a legacy of strength and generosity. And that is something no one can ever threaten, sue, or take away. For anyone out there going through a similar struggle with family, who feels like they've been left behind or that their efforts are being claimed by those who did nothing to help, know this: your story is yours. Your success is yours. And your strength is more powerful than any lie they can tell.